Okay, I've cut all my packing pieces out, and now I've got my fabric, and I'm using a jumbo cord in a kind of warm brown colour. Because of it being corduroy, you have to treat it the same way that you would treat velvet. So it means that everything needs to be cut in the same direction, because this has got a nap or pile. So if you sew a piece of fabric together, two pieces of fabric together, they need to make sure that they go in the same direction. So it's like treating it as if it's got a pattern on it. If I show you a piece, so if I open this out like that, you can see, well, you can't, I can feel that all the nap is going that way, and you can see it's nice and smooth. If I start doing that, it kind of rucks it up. And then if I put a separate piece next to it, you'll see, so this is a separate piece, and that's going, the pile going in the same direction. Okay, so they look the same. However, if I then sewed it on in the other direction, you can immediately see, so it's smooth going that way and that's smooth going that way, but there's a colour difference because of the direction of the pile. So that's why you need to make sure you cut everything in the same direction. Okay, so I've folded my fabric, I've matched up the selvage edge. So the selvage edge is the edge which it's attached to the loom. It's a finished edge. It might be fluffy like this, or it might be kind of bonded or sealed. Sometimes with wool you have things written in it, sometimes with cottons you have things written in it. This is the sides. These are the selvage, is the side of your fabric. Okay, and there's two sides to the fabric, and then the length of the fabric is from a cut point. So this is a cut edge, and down the other end of the fabric, this piece is about 3.5 meters long. The other end is a cut end, and that's the length of my fabric. And 99.9% of the time you cut everything so it goes down the length of your fabric. And the easiest way to cut things, to make sure that they are the same size, that you've got all the same parts, that they've all been cut in the same place, is to fold your fabric to match your selvage edges together. And your selvage, so the width of your fabric, if you want to get into the nitty gritty, the width of your fabric are the weft fibres, and the warp fibres are the length, and they are the strongest fibres. Okay, so which is why we talk about the straight of grain. It's really important that you follow the straight of grain, because that's following the warp fibres, which are the strongest ones. The second strongest are the ones on the weft. The way you remember which is the warp and which is the weft, or I remember, is the weft goes from weft to white. So that's your warp and that's your weft. And then you have the bias, which we cut a lot of dresses and things on the bias. The bias is a diagonal, so it's neither the weft or the warp. It is diagonally across the fabric, and it is actually the weakest point. And even with this fabric, which is quite a heavy corduroy, you've got if you pull on the bias, it will be springy. Okay, if I pull on the warp, solid. But if I pull on the bias, it's springy. Okay, so you got more stretch. Where we cut dresses on the bias, because then they mold, because they've got stretch. You cut them so that they fit the body, and the body can still move. If you cut things on the straight, you need to add in ease to garments so that people can fit into the garment and move. Okay, so I've matched my selvage as best as I can, and that's created a fold at the other side of my fabric. I'm going to be mindful that where my cut edge is, my underneath piece is smaller than my top piece, so I don't want to start pushing things right up to the top of my fabric, so I'm going to drop them down ever so slightly. What you need to do when you lay a big piece like this is to make sure that it is on the straight of grain. So to do that, and make sure it's straight of grain at the top and the bottom, it's very difficult sometimes to tell. So I'm just going to trace through to this side my straight of grain line, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure across to the edge of the fabric, to the selvage at the top here, and then I'm going to measure it across from down here, and it's ever so slightly out, so I just need to push that forward a little tiny bit, and then I'm going to check it again. Yeah, and then that is where it needs to lay. So I put my meter rule on it to keep it still. I use pins. If you want to use fabric weights, please do. I'm selling them on my Etsy shop if you want to buy some. However, I'm not a big fan of using them because I think they, well, I don't know why not really. I don't think I've ever used them. I should have used them for this, and then I could tell you why I don't like them. I just think it's a bit of an odd thing to do. You need your pattern attached to your fabric to start off with, because you've got vital information on your pattern, which you may not trace off until, or may not use until you have cut out. So for example, I'm going to cut it out and then I'm going to mark my notches. If my pattern isn't actually attached to my fabric and I pick it up and move it out of the way, I've then got to go through the process of getting my pattern attached again. So I just think it's a bit of a minefield of possible, I could see possible problems with it, that's all. Right, I need to find some more pins.